Welcome to the Daily Volatility Box report for November 22nd, 2019. We are TOSindicators.com, home of the Volatility Box. For tonight's video, we'll spend some time looking at some stock scan ideas for our Stock Volatility Box. So in particular, we've had a few of our futures traders talk about how there's been less volatility in the markets over the past couple weeks, and that subsequently leads to just fewer opportunities to be able to trade futures, right? And so the question then becomes, where can we start to look at for different opportunities where we have very similar setups, being able to trade at the edge with the same sort of probabilities that that the volatility box gives us, but now we can expand our horizon to things like stocks, where instead of 8 futures markets, we can also take a look at 8,300 stock symbols. Granted, not all of those symbols are really things that you care to trade about, but care to trade rather. But I think you understand the general sentiment of the idea that the horizon where we can start to scan does expand. And so now really what you have is both futures volatility box entries, which give you the hourly entries, and then our stock volatility box entries, which really give you that one price level where you're looking for price to get to, where you can start to make your decision. However, in that case, you have far more symbols that you're looking at, and that's how we kind of make that balance up. And so if we take a look first before we move on to the scan at our calendar for next week, we can see that we don't really have anything major on the calendar. It's also Thanksgiving week, so keep that in mind. And while you may expect a little less volatility in the markets, especially next week as well, you might be then looking at something like the stock volatility box, and at least using the scan that we'll talk about in tonight's video, Dan scan, which gives you essentially areas where you can start to focus and maybe find some more opportunities while the futures markets may not afford you the same opportunities. And if we head on over to the scan that Dan suggested, so he heads on over to investors.com every day. And I think, Dan, you mentioned that this populates 15 minutes after the market open. And that's this stocks on the move table. Right? If we take a second to just think about this logically, it makes sense. The volatility box, just by default, generally gives us fade ideas, fade trends. Granted, you can use it for ways of predicting what might be trending tomorrow, but if we look at it in its most core format, it gives you these levels where you can start to fade price action against. And so looking at stocks on the move sort of helps us achieve something similar that we were trying to get with that 5.75% scan that we had. However, the stocks on the move just gives you a far wider horizon or a basket that you might be looking at, right? Because we can start to see things like 1.61% moves that are still captured in this. However, they are on the move, and that should then still be a very valid entry for you, or at least a stock that you're looking at. And so now, if you are, say, on the Stock Volatility Box website, you have two scans that you might be looking at, which one is really for short candidates, which is the up in price, since these have now started to increase, and we're starting to look for areas where we might be able to short the stock, looking to make a move back down. And now, conversely, knowing that this is the IBD list, which generally speaking has lower liquidity than most other stocks, then you might be looking at something like the down in price, which lets you just buy the shares outright instead of having to worry about options, where there's more thinly traded options here, right? And so if we looked at down in price, then the logic is a little bit opposite, which is prices started to fall into our volatility box, and we're now looking for an opportunity to be able to catch that price action and look for that reversal, especially knowing that for some of them, at least for some of these lists, if you have high quality stocks on that list to begin with, then buying this dip is really just a very easy thing to do, considering that you were looking to buy anyways, and this is really just giving you a much, much better entry. And I think that's the way that you can start to use this scan. For those of you looking for some other scans as well, right? CMLVis, very similar idea. If you go to their main page, Ophir has a few different scans here, which give you some more candidates where you may be looking at, right? And so this is our momentum stack, and these might be candidates where you're not really looking to, say, try and fade these trades, considering that they have momentums that are stacked, at least moving averages that are stacked, rather. But you might be, say, trying to use similar logic that we did with the investors list or those high quality stocks, where you might, say, be looking at buys only for this list right here, where you have the highest revenue growth. So that sort of might be your logic that tells you, yes, good quality stock, or at least a stock that's showing some sort of potential. You're a little less afraid to be looking at going long the stock. And this list might be opportunities at just going long. Similarly, you might be looking at the high IV scan rank with the notion that if there's greater volatility there, we'll have entries at either side of our edge. And so really, this should start to give you an idea of how you can use the lots and lots of scans that are available online in these different lists, but you curate these lists to then start to narrow down your focus, find the scan that gives you sort of the most opportunities where you're comfortable taking entries with that scan. If, for example, you only like the high quality stuff, that's perfectly fine, but make sure you're aware of that, and that's what's considered in your scan, or at least the entries that you're looking at, right? And I think that kind of focus, that kind of clarity will really help you in terms of being able to trade just really objectively, emotionless, and just follow the trade plan that we've all set forth for all of us to really follow and profit off of. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week for Monday's nightly update. Take care, everyone.